Hello you lot, how's it going? I hope you're all fine and dandy. So, Nitro RC for beginners. Now and again, I like to add to this series. This is a whole series that I started quite some time ago about Nitro RC, Nitro engines and things for beginners. So, if you're a beginner, you've just bought yourself a Nitro car, or maybe you just want to watch this because you might learn something. I don't know, but the idea is people who want to get into Nitro, they can hopefully learn a few things, and it helps you because sometimes people feel a little bit daunted with Nitro. Well, I mean, I'm here to show you and tell you it's quite simple and you don't need to be daunted by it. It's very easy to grasp, and once you grasp it, you'll be fine. So this is an FTX Carnage. I'm using this as the example, and I have done throughout the whole series of Nitro RC for beginners, because it's a beginner's car. It's a car that most beginners, not all, but most, will come across and end up buying. Very simple platform, very simple car, very easy to get a hang of. So let's talk about needles, carburetors. There seems to be, and always is, a lot of confusion. And not only confusion, if you're a beginner and you start looking up how to tune or how a Nitro engine carburetor works, you'll probably be quite confused, because there's a lot of people out there who have been doing Nitro for quite some time and they forget that people are beginners, and they start talking about this and that, and you must do this, and you must turn that needle a certain way, you must turn that needle a certain way, you must set this at a certain gap, and do all this kind of stuff, and making it sound more complicated than it really is. So let's talk about what each needle does, and then we can talk about how you should go about adjusting it. So let's take the air filter off to make it a little bit easier to see what we're looking at. On these Carnages, at least, I don't think they've changed the design of the carburetor or the engine or anything. This particular one's from 2019. I've got one from 2021. They're both the same. So assuming they both still have a 2-needle carburetor, this is the high-speed needle, okay? You've got to remember, on Nitro engines, they're called needles. Really, because all my life I've worked with engines, and when it comes to full-size engines, carburetors, we call them jets. I don't know what you call them in your countries, but here in England we call them jets. High speed, not even the high speed, it's just a fuel, a main, a pilot, a main, and an idle circuit, or a tick over circuit, what we call it here, but you'll probably call it idle. But Nitro carburetors, you have different names for things. So we have a high speed needle here, and we have a low speed needle in there. See that little brass looking screw? Now, although this one is called high speed and that one's called low speed, slightly misleading really, because the high speed will change how the engine runs overall. So it will change how it ticks over. It will change how it runs on low RPMs. And it will change how it starts. It'll change a lot of stuff, because really, as you can see, the fuel, the nitro, comes in from the tank and goes straight in to the high-speed needle. So if this is set to lean, for example, and lean, as I say, in Nitro, there are different names for things, whereas at least here in England, if a petrol engine hasn't got enough petrol or enough fuel going into it, we would call it weak. It would be too weak. But with Nitro, it's lean. Just like you get a lean piece of steak, I suppose, no fat on it. And with Nitro, when there's too much fuel, too much nitro, it's called rich. Much the same as a petrol engine, we call that rich, but it's weak and rich instead of lean and rich. Anyway, back to that one. So, if it's too lean, it will affect how it starts, how it runs, because the fuel goes through this needle to start with. And then it comes out. You probably aren't going to be able to see. Hopefully you can. Yes, it will come out. Can you see that little gap there? That little, see that little, like that long thing you can see to the right hand side, or bottom of the screen, probably bottom right, that is the low speed needle that goes in through there, and that goes inside that other thing there, and that meters the amount of nitro going in as well. So along with this one and this one, they work together to meter the amount of nitro going in. Now this is why I say that it's always a good idea to start with your high-speed needle when it comes to adjusting or tuning, because it has an overall effect, so it's a good idea to. Some people like to start with the low speed, but the trouble being, if you get your low speed where you're happy with, when you then go to your high speed, it'll knock your low speed all around, all over the place, and you'll have to start again adjusting the low speed. So in my opinion and in my experience, it's always a good idea, if I can press the right buttons on the camera there, it's always a good idea to start with the high speed. Get that reasonable, get it where it'll pull away nicely. It's not running too lean with a, you know, like, it sounds like Quagmire out of bloody Family Guy when they go too lean. That always reminds me of that. I think it sounds like Quagmire. Anyway, so get it so that it's running all right, and then use the low speed needle to do a bit of fine tuning. Fine tuning. You don't even have to touch it at all, really. It's perfectly acceptable, and in some cases I don't even touch the low speed needle if I'm just playing around, you know, if I'm not trying to tune the engine to be at its peak performance. If I just want it to be great just for blasting around a park or around a skate park or something, a little bit of adjustment to the high speed will be more than enough, and more than all you need in order to get it to be perfectly usable. So the high speed, just to recap on that, it will have an overall effect on how it runs. Use the low speed for fine tuning once you've got the high speed where you want it. And some of you are probably going to say, well, how do I know where I want it? I mean, this is why I'm here. I don't know where I want it. How do I know? And this is where I always say to people, Nitro RC is a hobby within itself. Okay, you have to be interested in engines and how they run, and most of all, most importantly, you have to be interested in learning. If you are one of those people who gets a nitro car and you just want it to run, and when it doesn't run properly, or maybe not at all, you get frustrated, you get annoyed, and then you want to go and find someone to do it for you. Because the trouble being, if you take it to a shop or to somebody else to get it running and tune it for you, it might run and be tuned fine when they do it. They give it back to you, and in 2 days, a week's time, you go and start it up and think, okay, it's done now. You go down the park and it's not running right. You're going to get annoyed. You're going to go to that person. You haven't done it properly. It's not working properly. But you need to understand that they change all the time. So when you learn how to adjust the carburetor properly, you won't think, I have to change it, I have to adjust it all the time. Bloody thing's not worth it, because every time it's always different and it never runs right. That's just because you don't understand it. When you understand it, you'll start it up and you'll go, oh, it's a little bit lean today. Tweak that needle a little bit, and it's perfect again. Away you go. Have a great day. Because now you understand it. Now, you will hear, if you're doing a lot of research, going onto the internet, on YouTube in particular, and searching about how to set what they call an idle gap, or what I would just call just a general tick over, just to set the tick over. A lot of people will say that you must go to the trouble of setting that gap there. Can you see that little gap? Let me get a Have I got a screwdriver? No, I haven't got a screwdriver, but I've got an aerial tube. There's a little gap there. You probably can see the gap in the corner there. Can you see it? If I open up the throttle, there we go. Watch, it doesn't close all the way. Ready? See, there's a gap. Now, a lot of people will say you must set that to 1 millimeter. Some people say 1.5, some people say 0.5. Most people say 1 before you do any amount of adjustments to any needles. Listen, I don't ever do that personally, and I can only tell you how I personally do things. I've never, ever, ever measured a gap on a throttle slide before. I tend to just look at them. If they look roughly fine, happy days. Then I'll run the engine, adjust the high-speed needle first, get it so that it's running okay. And by running okay, I mean no giggities like Quagmire, and not too rich where it's all sluggish. It doesn't want to pull away, doesn't want to drive. If it drives fine, sounds okay, doesn't sound too high-pitched when it's ticking over, doesn't start going yee and want it to go by itself, you know that it's all right. When the tick over, if the tick over is too low, you can adjust it with the low-speed needle or the tick over screw. The tick over screw on these particular carburetors is there. Can you see that little screw there? That's the tick over screw. That doesn't have any metering effect. All that does is never wants to focus. And when you screw it in, it simply pushes on that slide and pushes it out. So it opens it up and it will make the tick over higher. The reason the tick over goes higher is because more air is able to be sucked in through that gap, because that gap will become bigger. If you turn it the other way, outwards, the gap will become smaller, the tick over will become lower, and it may not tick over at all. So the real way of doing it is to get that. You can measure it if you want to 1 millimeter, but I don't think measurements really come into it. It all depends on the different engine in particular. But get that to a reasonable place, and then use the low speed and the high speed, mainly the low speed, to make it faster or slower. Leaner, turning the screw inwards, would make the tick over higher. Turning it outwards and making it richer on the low end will make the tick over lower. It's important to remember that adjusting a carburetor is a balance. It's getting a balance. There is no, I know there are factory settings and standard settings for carburetors. It may be 2 turns out, 1.5 turn out, 3 turns out. It may be any of that. Those are the base settings to get you in the ballpark, to get you somewhere where the engine will run. That's not gospel, so to speak, if you know what I mean. A lot of people go on about the base settings as if they are the Bible. They're not. They're just somewhere that the manufacturers have found out when they've made the carburetor. Oh, okay, so if we set these needles to 2 turns out on the high speed, for example. Well, we've got a lot of house stones outside now. Bloody Jesus. House stones. And maybe 1.5 turns out on the low speed. The engine will run reasonably enough for the end user, the customer, to be able to adjust it how they want it. It's just good enough, these base settings. Oh, I think we're going to... yeah, we won't be going out today and doing anything. There we go. Customs. Love them, man. Love them. So, I'm trying not to let this sound too complicated, but I don't know whether it's working or not. I'm normally alright from what people have said, but I'm trying to go about it a different way this time. It's just don't worry too much about any of it. That's the key. That's what I would like to say to you the most, is stop. Don't panic about it. Don't worry about it. All right? Just have an open mind and be willing to learn about it. And if you come to you spend half an hour outside playing around with that and you just can't get it to be right, and you think it's something wrong with it, stop. You'll be fine. You'll get it worked out. Can, obviously, the way I do quite often, and I always get people in the comments say that I'm doing it wrong, but to be honest, I'm not doing it wrong. I'm just doing it the way that I like to do it, which is adjusting the tick over with the tick over screw. Now, you will find that sometimes if that gap is too big, it will suck in extra air, which will create what some of you will definitely have heard of, because for some reason a lot of it's like a major phenomenon in the Nitro YouTube world about, they call it a two-stage idle, or I don't know, I just call it a tick over that's sometimes a bit high. I mean, I can't understand why it has to have a name and all this kind of stuff. It's just a simple thing where when the throttle slide is closed, there's a little bit too much air still going in, so when it's trying to tick over, there's not enough nitro going in. I'm trying to make sure I explain this right so I don't confuse you. There's not enough nitro going in, so it makes it tick over a little bit too high, just a little bit. And once it settles down, once it burns off any nitro that it's got left in its crank, and it just kind of goes from being a bit whereas it should just go straight down. It kind of hangs. It lingers a little bit higher, and then it'll settle down to a nice tick over. It's simply just because that little gap is slightly too big, and all you have to do is just turn that tick over screw out ever so slightly, bring that gap a little bit smaller, and you probably will get rid of that. But personally, I don't care whether they do that or not. Some people really do care about it, and they really get annoyed over anyone who's got one of those two-stage tick over, two-stage idles for some reason. But don't let that bother you. I've had quite a few people, not recently, but in the past, pardon me, send me PMs saying my engine it's got a two-stage on it. It's got a two-stage, and I'm like, what do you mean, bloody two? Who cares? No one. It's running fine. You can get rid of it if you want, but it doesn't matter. But people always have a go at me for it. But just don't worry about it. It's fine. Nothing wrong with it. You can get rid of it, but it's not anything bad. To be honest, personally, I think it sounds pretty good. I quite like it when they do that, to be honest. You go, and you come to a stop and it goes, I quite like that. Makes it sound like it's ready to rock and roll, man. I think, personally, but who cares? Who cares what I think? No one. So, hopefully, I've cleared it up slightly. The high-speed needle is here. It will have an overall effect on how the whole engine runs. The low speed should be used for fine-tuning. Fine-tuning. After you've got the high speed to where you want it. Tick over screw can be forgotten about until you've finished, unless it's majorly high or too low and doesn't tick over at all, then you can adjust it. But wait until you've finished doing your adjustments on the high and the low, and then adjust the tick over screw to somewhere nice, and then you can use the low speed to really fine tune the tick over and really get it so that it's where you want it. There is no definition of a perfectly running nitro engine. And why do I say that? I say that because, in my opinion, your engine will run how you want it to run. In some cases, they run how they want to run, and you just have to accept that and just move on with life and enjoy them as they are. Some engines, they will just run. You'll never get them perfect because they are not perfect. Some engines. Some people spend ages trying to get their engines to run perfect. They keep going on about, oh, it's no good, it won't hold a tune. well, it's not about not holding a tune. Fair enough, the carburetor might be slightly worn or something, but that's just the engine. As long as it's running and you drive it and it can drive and it's reasonably powerful and it's okay, stop panicking about it. In which case, just enjoy it. But there is no perfectly running engine. It will run how you make it run. And it's all about learning. It's learning, my friends. You'll never get it perfect or really good straight away. It'll probably take you a few months to get it so that you can understand and get engines to run well. I'm chuckling to myself because I just watched the footage back on the camera and I thought, I think I've got it all right. So hopefully, listen, by all means, if you are a bit more experienced and you think I've missed something, there'll always be someone who thinks I've said it all wrong and done it all wrong, because apparently the way I do things is wrong, but it's fine. If you have anything to add, please put it in the comments and everybody can read them and we can all put things together and make things more understandable. All I can say is, good luck. You won't need it because you'll be fine. You'll get your engine running great. There will be more videos of this car and more things as I think of them coming up, adding to the series of Nitro for Beginners. Thanks for watching. Treat people nicely and treat people how you would like to be treated, and we should have a nice happy life. I'll see you later on. Cheerio. All the best, you lot.